So, welcome everyone. We're just getting the final sort of things in place, and hopefully everyone is settled in. We've got a really great set of presenters during the day. You appreciate that this is an experimental kind of offering of the conference, but I'm sure as things move along, we'll make sure that everything sort of runs smoothly. We've got a great team behind us, and looks like we're ready to go. So yeah, I just want to, well, Linda will say a few words in a moment, but I just want to first of all note that the reason why we're not meeting at Lincoln and we're not all gathering together and having all those neat conversations and engagement and kind of learning so much more about the industry from each other is simply the whole country and the whole world is locked into staying home, which creates all sorts of interesting challenges and lots of crazy outcomes. But at the moment, we're all trying to cope with that. So hopefully today, and in doing this in this environment, we've actually done something which is helping people kind of come to terms with where they're up to. And I just hope in some way it just contributes to the development of the industry and we highlight some of the great things that have been going on. So thank you so much, everyone that's been coming through and is coming through, and we'll get started. So Linda, do you want to say a few words, and then we'll hand over to our first presenters?
Yeah, just want to say welcome to everyone who's tuned in here. I think there are about 100 people online watching the YouTube channel at the moment. So that's great. So thanks everyone for joining in. And I think it's really important that we try and do what we can here to bring the community together during these difficult times. Some of us are, essential workers trying to keep food production going to feed everyone. Some of us, like me and Craig, we are not that essential, but we want to do our bit to try and keep things going. And while we can't have those, give each other a hug or have those face-to-face conversations today, at least this is something to bring the sheep milk community together.
All right, so just to start off, we have with us Jan Hales and Shane Kells. Now, Jan is she works for Food South, and she and Shane and John Morgan and others have been involved in a really important piece of work funded by the Provincial Growth Fund, and she'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But I just want to welcome Jan Long, and she's going to do the first presentation. So over to you, Jan.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. And look, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. Shane and I are going to present some of the findings from the Sheep and Goat Dairy Project, and it's the first time we've presented this work. It is, although it's close to finalisation, just want to mention that it hasn't been signed off by government yet, so it is still essentially a draft. So if you could just please bear that in mind if you're planning to relay any of the content. So we'll present this in two parts. So I'll start by giving a bit of background to the project and then talk about the key findings on the global market opportunity and what this means for developing New Zealand's sheep milk industry. And then I'll hand over to Shane, who's going to talk about the implications from a processing and farming perspective. So the Sheep and Goat Dairy Project has been undertaken by the New Zealand Food Innovation Network, primarily Food South, and as Craig mentioned, it's funded through the Provincial Growth Fund. We started this project in January last year. It is a sheep and goat project, but of course we're just talking about the sheep part today. And as the PGF project, because it is a PGF project, our focus has really been on opportunities to grow the industry and to stimulate regional economies. So we've been really looking at how to scale the sector, and it's not to say that small artisan style businesses aren't important, because they certainly give the industry real character, but for the purposes of this, we've really focused on export markets and the opportunities to tap into these to meet the PGF goals. In our report, there is actually a section on the New Zealand market, but we're not going to cover that today, so we're just looking at export. But I think a lot of what we covered is relevant to the New Zealand market as well. So the from the outset, we really talked about all investment decisions needing to be market-led. So understanding what's happening at a market level was where we started. And then we looked back across the supply chain just to work out how New Zealand could win. So on a market side, we analysed 5 priority export markets in quite a lot of depth. That were China, the US, Germany, South Korea and Taiwan. And in those markets, we were interested to understand the current demand for high-value sheep milk products, both imported and locally produced. And we specifically looked at cheese, yoghurt, butter, UHT milk, nutritional powders, and infant formula. We were particularly interested to see what they were selling for in retail and also who the main players were. We didn't speak to consumers, so our consumer insights are limited to what we've gathered through secondary research. So just 3 key points really that I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail that came out of this. Well, the sheep market, the market for sheep milk products is small and undeveloped. The second point is that we found that the high farm gate milk price expectation limits where we can compete. And thirdly, that in order to win and be able to sustain that high milk price, we need to position New Zealand sheep milk products at the premium end of the market. So, as I mentioned, the market for sheep milk products is small and undeveloped, so it's really, really hard to get accurate data on market size and growth. I've come up with some figures where we know products exist using various assumptions, and those numbers might not be exact, but I think they still give us a general picture of what's going on. And we do know, though, that the demand for non-bovine milks is growing. So that's not just sheep milk, it's also goat, and also the plant-based milk and alternative market is also growing. So just to illustrate, just to go into what we found in those markets. So among the 5 countries we looked at, we found that Germany is the most developed market for sheep milk products. And although it might be difficult for us to compete there, I think it gives us an idea of what might be possible in other markets where there are similar consumer trends. Of the 6 products we looked at, cheese is the most traded format, with the US, Germany being the main importers. That's of those 5 markets we looked at. And those markets are relatively mature, and the category is dominated by European sheep cheeses. And it's not really surprising when you think that 95% of sheep milk processed commercially in Europe actually gets turned into cheese. So that's where a big part of the focus is. There's a small amount of UHT milk and yogurt excuse me, being imported by Germany, and they're getting that from their neighbouring countries, and a very even smaller amount of sheep milk sheep milk is being turned into powders for the Asian market. So it's infant formula and nutritional powders, and we understand that those categories are also growing. So some of those powders use New Zealand sheep milk, and the rest comes from Europe, so the likes of Sardinia and Spain. And we also understand that China is starting to develop its commercial sheep industry and will become a greater threat in that space over time. So we know the current sheep milk market is small, but that doesn't mean it can't be created, and it doesn't mean that we can't win in that space. And I think you only need to reflect on what the A2 Milk Company, for example, has achieved by developing a new market segment. And I think the key thing is having something that's unique and valuable. So when we started looking at the opportunities for New Zealand sheep milk, we quickly came to realise that the farm gate milk price expectation is really central to this and determines where we can compete. So the milk price for sheep milk in New Zealand is among the highest in the world, and on average it's around $2.75 per litre. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the contrast to that, is that sheep farmers in Sardinia were last year getting $1.45 New Zealand equivalent for their milk, and it even dropped down to about $1.10 per litre. So our milk costs about 2 to 3 times more than our competitors. I think there's a couple of things that we can take from this. Firstly, for a New Zealand farmer, needs to be mindful that they're competing in a global market where their competitors do sell milk for a lot less than they do. And there are also processors in New Zealand who are bringing milk ingredients in from overseas and trading off being made in New Zealand. So if you are, and the second point is that if you are a processor or a brand owner using New Zealand sheep milk in your products, you are really limited to competing in those premium categories or the premium end of every category where the margins are high. So it's just sort of worth bearing in mind too, I think, that sheep milk products, and it's really irrespective of where the milk comes from, already attracts a premium over their cow's milk equivalent. So New Zealand really needs to be targeting the premium end of the sheep milk segment. So just to illustrate this, for categories like drinking yogurt, which is one of the largest and fastest growing categories in China, and from that perspective looks really, really attractive, the potential margins for New Zealand sheep yogurt are pretty grim. So if you look at the red bar on the left, based on the current retail price for a non-bovine milk yogurt, which is $5.50 per kilo US, you'd be making a loss of $3.90 per kilo, and that's actually in New Zealand dollars. So so for yogurt to be viable using this supply chain model, we'd need to be getting retail prices of around 15 to 20 US dollars per kilo, or somehow change the model in a way that you can really cut out a whole lot of costs from the supply chain. And you get a similar picture for UHT milk. If we look to infant formula, though, the situation does look a lot brighter, and that's mainly because the cost to manufacture is lower relative to its retail value, and therefore it's an easier win. And Shane will go into a bit more detail about this. But the problem we have, though, is we can't build an industry on infant formula, and if we therefore can't diversify our product mix, we're not in a good position to respond to changing consumer trends, like, for example, falling birth rates or shifts from powder formats into sort of fresher or more liquid formats. So in order to make this work, consumers and everyone along the supply chain really needs to value the difference that New Zealand products offer and be willing to pay for that difference. And the industry as a whole really needs to work hard to show that worth. So to be able to win and sustain that high milk price, we really need to position New Zealand sheep milk products at that premium end of the market. So the question is, how do we do this? And I think really we need to start with the consumer and understanding who they are, what they value, what they're willing to pay for, and then really working hard to deliver on these. So we've got lots of strengths that we can already build on. We're great at making safe, high quality, nutritious dairy products. These are dairy products that are technically challenging to make. We have animals that are raised on pasture that roam freely in paddocks. That's all part of a nice sort of consumer story. But we also need to understand our weaknesses and work hard to minimise these. We can't just rely on telling one part of the story. So this industry is still really young, and there's lots of experimentation going on to improve efficiencies, reduce costs. But as we grow, I think we must be, we have to be really, really careful not to compromise on the things that our premium customers or consumers and also the wider society values. So this is just some of the things that we found and been thinking about. There are there's a lot more that we have to share with you that we couldn't really squeeze into a 10-15 minute presentation, but I just hope you get a bit of a taste for what our thinking is and our main findings. And once we've got the government sign off of our report, we will be able to share more of this with you. So I will just a few acknowledgements there, but also would just want to hand over to Shane from now on. He can pick it up and talk about the processing and farm side.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. The following presentation covers the manufacturing farming section, as Jan's explained. Look, it's just a snippet of the report, but I'd like to thank those that have participated over the last 12 months in providing the data. The financial models developed through this presentation were based on consultation with key players such as Spring, Sheep, Maui, Milk and Food Waikato. We've provided scenarios that are typical. However, it's important to acknowledge that the sheep sector is new in New Zealand and continually experimenting, so we're learning as we go. I'm just having problems trying to move this at the moment. Right. So thanks to Massey University, we've got a snapshot of the 2019 industry. New Zealand produced around 1.6 million litres across 18 farms and a little over 12,000 milking ewes. The average milk yield was around 130 litres per ewe, and some of the flocks produced around an average of 240. We expect this to potentially get up to around 400 in the near future, with an average milk price around $2.75. Which is about $15.90 per kilogram of milk solids. And the average solids content was around 17.3%. With the help of Spring Sheep and Maui Milk, the team were able to create a financial model for those interested in sheep milk dairying. It was a relatively new industry, so some of the questions are yet to be answered, such as the economies of scale when supplement feeding. However, the model surely shows the importance of the genetic gains and increase of milk yield and the ability to maximise numbers of ewes per hectare. Experience of bovine farming systems indicate a robust model and should be undertaken well ahead of any investment and sensitivity analysis. For those that are interested in a 10-year financial model, we have
this meeting is being recorded,
and we should have that available probably later on next month. Thanks to KPMG, we were able to sit down with 25 bankers about middle of last year, so things might have changed a little bit. I know there's been some consultation with Spring and Maui since that conversation, but the feedback at the time, banks were quite concerned around the modelling of a 55 hectare property, which is what we've done. This was based on the reuse asset value, and the other major concern around the banks was the sale of milk and the available contracts to farmers. So where the farmers could display a contract with a substantial multinational partner, and that's what they were looking for basically, that security of market, the banks reduced their concerns significantly. And they showed a real level of comfort with Spring Sheep and Maui Milk, which is fantastic. Banks advised that any model of bank should have a level of sensitivity and a break-even point. And farmers should consider capital costs of labour and the ability to provide housing if and when required. So there's a number of opportunities for our farmers to utilise additional land and diversify a secondary income, particularly with the small blocks working on a 55 hectare property. We also see some advantages in the blockchain technology to support the provenance of milk and traceability from farm to plate. So we suggest a continued genetics improvement to increase milk yield and improve the bottom line. And we should really be ready for overseas market regulations changing, particularly around drenches and antibiotics. So processing in New Zealand, for the team to understand what processing is required, we have undertaken a number of interviews and try to get around our multinational partners to find out what's available. But we also needed to identify which products we can win on, as Jan said earlier on. And this was achieved by working from both ends of the market. As the bottom one explains there, that we work from the market one end and we work from the farm the other side. So this gave us an approximate New Zealand margin, and it was clearly evident that the infant formula and nutritional products provided the best margins. So, however, we can see some real opportunity in cheese and butter as well. Unfortunately, the high gate price, as Jen talked about earlier, is a major driver towards which products we can win on, but other factors also included the exchange rate and tariffs. So for New Zealand to win, we must scale in infant formula, I think, first off, and it provides us the greatest opportunity for export value. And to understand how we can win an infant formula, a model was created with an indicative formulation. We used 100,000 litres of milk, and we're able to manufacture 72,000 kilograms of infant formula. So the model shows that we can do this because the average content of the formula is 28% milk. Other minor and major components are made up of the remaining volume, such as lactose, etc. We looked at the average market price from the US, China, Taiwan, Korea, and Germany, which is approximately $81 a kilogram of market. And using the average New Zealand margin of $42, we could turn $247,000 of milk into around $3 million worth of product. And that's how we can create some real value. So one of the issues for the infant formula, those that are in infant formula, have been getting dictated by import ingredient pricing, such as products like whey powder. For this reason, there's been some interest in creating the protein products for sheep and goat milk within New Zealand. And like that of the previous model, a similar exercise was done to engineer the bucket of milk, effectively maximising the components. So unfortunately, the product values for casein and lactose came from bovine, as there's no current market price in sheep products. So we could assume that the actual true value is probably 20 to 30% higher than what you see there. Although the outcome is slightly lower than cost, we need to consider the security of supply and the quality of ingredient coming in, and the potential protein value of future milk products. So to understand this a little bit more, I think there's some more work that needs to be done in the industry. We strongly recommend that more benefits around health and functionality of properties such as fat and proteins. So we need to do some more work there. So our study also indicated that the milk, so goat milk infant formula may double in size. It's particularly strong in China. It's leading the way, where the rest of the world is kind of declining a little bit. But goat infant formula is taking off. We would think that sheep milk would sit on the back of this, and we estimate about 1,000 tonne in 2019, and a little over 14,000 tonne could be in 2024. New Zealand would potentially take a 50% share of this, around 7,200 tonne. So using the current volumes of 1.6 million litres, New Zealand could potentially produce just over 1,100 tonne of infant formula. And the additional of 8.4 million litres per annum from 40,000 ewes, producing 250 litres a head, would be required to fill this future demand. And we'd require 1 or 2 dryers to be built in New Zealand. We estimate those to be around about 1.2 tonne an hour would be sufficient. And considering future production, economies of scale when planning dryers is pretty critical, because we need to reduce the manufacturing costs. So the size of the dryer will be very important when deciding this. So the team also put together a 10-year financial model for those that are interested in investing into a spray dryer. And this particular model covers sheep, goat, and bovine. The model clearly indicates a strong financial return for those that have an owner-operator model. So that means basically taking milk from gate and then controlling the distribution of products through to market. The investor will need to consider factors such as the effluent discharge, water intake, energy supply before choosing a location in New Zealand. With the potential of limiting resources, and we know that this has been a problem, particularly in the Waikato to South Auckland, about trying to get consent processes for new build. I think New Zealand needs to protect its future opportunities for locations in New Zealand. The ability to employ experienced staff will be essential for any infant formula, given its technical capabilities. So just to wrap up, for New Zealand to grow, we need to have processing capability outside Central North Island. That's the only place we can go at scale at the moment. There's 2 logical locations, Lower South North Island and Central South Island. The main difficulty here is raising capital for new dryers will remain the biggest barrier to entry. So Food Waikato has shown the way through a shared access model, and we should investigate this further. I think it's a great opportunity to take a learning from them. and the economies of scale will need to be carefully considered when reducing the manufacturing costs. It's really important we get that. So our future research on proteins and fats may create further opportunities for New Zealand. And although the infant formula may be the first product to really scale up and win for New Zealand, there's opportunities in cheese and butter as we see it. So that's it. So I really thank everybody that's provided support for this project over the last 12 months. It's been really rewarding. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Shane. You might want to take a couple of questions if you're still with us. And just a note to say apologies for some of the screen problems we've been having, but we seem to be slowly sorting those out, which is great. So, Shane, I wonder if you could just briefly mention, I guess, that whole sort of butter yogurt challenge and what the manufacturing options might be for that. How does that fit into the broad? Where does that fit?
Unfortunately, for most of us, we don't have options currently for a commercial export opportunity in New Zealand. So we do have the likes of the Food Innovation Network, which we can go to the Food Bowl, and there are some small operations around New Zealand that can probably do the New Zealand-Australia market, but we need something at scale, to be brutally honest. So we just need some investment. Okay.
There's a question here on infant formula components. I think that was something. Have you got any sort of comments you might want to make about that? So the question is, when you look at the margins for infant formula, do you assume that all dairy components are from sheep, or do you assume that some other components, i.e., are included? I guess that's
a good question. That's a really
good question. So that's again something which you've covered in another piece of work, but maybe you want to just mention that in relation to the infant formula option that you've been talking about.
So, and I can't speak for every brand because everybody's got a different philosophy, particularly when marketing. But there are the majority of brands will need lactose. We use predominantly bovine lactose. That's what's available. And lactose in some markets aren't deemed a dairy product when it's in a lactose form. So the biggest component is the whey component, I think, and that's what everybody's chasing, trying to import that. And we predominantly use goat whey rather than sheep's whey because it's just so hard to get hold of. Everything else is pretty much as is, it's just sheep components. Vitamins and minerals are obviously imported. So look, we've got the whole milk from New Zealand and we've got lactose from New Zealand, and mostly everything else is imported.
Cool, that's great. So we're still facing that challenge of the whey, but that's only for certain markets, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't have to put whey into infant formula. So obviously, we've got some very successful brands in New Zealand that work off a skim protein base and do it really, really well. It's up to the brand whether they feel that infant formula requires whey or they're trying to get it close to the human milk. So it's just it's up to the brand. Cool.
Hey, thanks very much for that, Shane. And I just want to thank both of you for stepping up first up and kicking this off. So that's been really great.